let us talk about invasive species and extinction. Now, looking at invasive species, what do I mean when I say that invasive species? What do you think that means? Kind of says it up there. So these are species that survive and reproduce outside of the habitat they naturally evolved in. This can be a big issue because if you have a species that ends up in an ecosystem that didn't evolve with that species, this can give them a lot of unfair advantages. And we're going to look at a lot of examples today where we have introduced species either intentionally or accidentally, and has caused a lot of ecological harm. Because maybe these species we introduced, for example, have no predators. If they have no predators, what's going to happen? Is there anything controlling their populations? Not really, right? And this is a huge problem around the world. And we're going to learn that, unfortunately, the countries most affected tend to be Australia and New Zealand. They've been hooped so many times by invasive species. So, when we introduce a species, this species can either be invasive or non-invasive. Now, both types are, due to human activity, these species were brought into environments they did not naturally evolve. However, with an invasive species, this is one that does damage to an ecosystem. Zebra mussels, for example, are an invasive species in North America. They originally come from Russia, I believe. Does anybody know the big downside of zebra mussels? What makes them invasive, damaging to ecosystems? They're a filter feeder. They reproduce prolifically. They're kind of small, so they're not very good for human consumption. But they clarify the water column, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But if you clarify the water, this allows the sun to penetrate deeper. You get more decomposition of things in the benthos and in the bottom, the sediments. You tend to get larger algal blooms. Overall, zebra mussels change the ecosystem. They're kind of ecosystem engineers. They change the clarity of your water column. And for us, they're a huge nuisance. We're really scared they could end up in something like Shoal Lake. Shoal Lake is what? Why is Shoal Lake important? It's where we get our water. Now we pipe that water in. These things are super annoying. If they get into Shoal Lake and they start clogging up our pipes, it's going to cost us a ton of money to keep our pipes clean. To keep them from clogging up with these stupid zebra mussels. So, a non-invasive species is a species that is introduced into an ecosystem and does not cause harm to that ecosystem. For example, peach trees in North America would be a good example. It's not causing ecological harm. Peach trees aren't taking over in the southern United States. Another example is something like tomatoes. Tomatoes were brought here from Europe, right? They are not an invasive species because they are not proliferating in the wild uncontrollably. They're not taking over ecosystems. These would be considered non-invasive species. Now, an invasive species is one that is introduced and causes harm to that ecosystem. Examples could be the zebra mussel, which originated in Russia, and now it's found kind of all over the world. The mollusk eggs are quite tiny. They can end up on boats, these mollusks. They can end up in the bilge water of boats. It's very easy to spread them. They've spread all over the Great Lakes. They've spread to most of the large rivers and lakes around North America. Eventually, they'll probably be in all of the rivers and lakes in North America. So, zebra mussels are a big concern because they can clog up pipes and they contaminate the water. Now, what do invasive species do anyway? Why do they pose such a threat? What is special about an invasive species that makes them so dangerous to an ecosystem? Well, first of all, it's foreign, right? This did not evolve within that ecosystem, and as a result, the ecosystem is often poorly equipped to handle it. Maybe this organism has some sort of behavioral characteristics that make it much more competitive when gaining resources. So it outcompetes natural wildlife, and thus that natural wildlife, those populations start to decline. We're seeing that with, for example, Asian carp species in many of the rivers in the US. Right? Asian carp are such prolific feeders that they are outcompeting all sorts of wild fish, and as a result, it's decreasing the wild populations. They're taking over. They can be more aggressive in their hunting behaviors. Now, maybe they just don't have any predators. We're going to watch a video on the cane toad, for example, which is a huge issue in Australia. It's pretty much moved across the entire country now. They have no natural predators, and on top of that, they produce poisons, which are killing off the natural wildlife within Australia. So the things that try to eat them actually die because they can't handle the poisons that these toads make. So there's a lot of characteristics which can be bad, and we have trouble predicting them. We introduced cane toads to Australia thinking it was a good idea to control these pests that were eating the sugarcane crop. Turns out that was a really dumb idea. And that tends to be the norm when we introduce species. Now, New Zealand is a very interesting example. Simply because New Zealand, prior to human settlement, didn't have any mammals on it. Clearly, I'm asking that question because there weren't any mammals on it. So it was just, fish, birds, and in fact, because there was no mammals, there wasn't a lot of ground-based predators. So a lot of their birds, do you guys know what their national bird is, by the way? New Zealanders are also nicknamed this. Kiwis. You guys have ever heard that before? New Zealanders, their nickname is their Kiwis. Their national bird is the kiwi. Now the kiwi is like a little flightless bird, and it's endangered because of the particular mammal that was introduced. Do you know what's a plague on the island of New Zealand? Which mammal do you think it is? Lots of people own them as pets.
It's a dog or a cat?
It's not a dog, it's a cat. Feral cats are a huge issue there, like a huge issue. And it's killing all of their ground-dwelling birds that lost the ability to fly, because evolutionarily, they didn't need the ability to fly because there wasn't those ground-based predators. So, in particular, cats are destroying all of their native birds. So this is the kiwi bird right here, by the way. But yes, New Zealanders, if you ever meet one, they are nicknamed kiwis. So extinction, you guys all know what extinction is. If a species goes extinct, what does that mean? It's gone. We call that global extinction. There's also local extinction, which means it's gone from a specific area, but still exists on planet Earth. Now, global extinction would be like the dodo, or dinosaurs, or the carrier pigeon, or there's tons of examples. Now, these are completely gone. And currently we do not have technology to bring them back, despite how awesome Jurassic Park the movie is. So this means they are gone forever. And right now the extinction rate is so high on Earth, estimated to be about 10,000 times higher than background levels. Most scientists agree we've entered the 6th mass extinction on Earth. They're calling it the Anthropocene extinction. Anthropocene. What does that word mean? Have you guys heard climate change? We call it anthropomorphic climate change. It pretty much means the human-caused climate change. The Anthropocene is the human-caused extinction. So, big issue. Species are going extinct at a very quick rate. Now, and by the way, that rate's increasing. I'll talk more about that at the end of this unit. But we are destroying the natural world. Local extinction. This is a species that's gone extinct in a specific area. For example, the saltwater crocodile in Vietnam. It used to be there. They hunted them to extinction. Local extinction, because obviously saltwater crocodiles exist other parts of the world. Now, this is kind of the really important part because there will be a question on your test, there will be a question on the exam, on this effect called the cascade effect, trophic cascades. Now, in certain ecosystems, if you remove the right species, you can cause what's called a trophic cascade, where the removal of that species can cause a dieback loop, where you get pretty much the wholesale destruction of that ecosystem. Now, we've seen this before. This has happened in recent history to this ecosystem right here, off the coast of Canada. So, we almost hunted sea otters to extinction for their fur. And it so happens that sea otters are the main predator of these guys right here, sea urchins. Those, purple spiky things you see in the ocean. Now, you might not think, well, that's whatever, who cares? But sea urchins eat giant kelp. Now, giant kelp they make a very important ecosystem in our oceans. They form these giant kelp forests that allow a lot of different species to live there. They're areas of high biodiversity. They are very productive. Now, by removing the sea otters, we effectively got rid of the sea urchin's main predator. So what happened to that sea urchin population? It exploded, right? It exploded. So what do you think happened to the giant kelp? Yeah, the sea urchins deforested large regions of giant kelp. It led to what we called kelp bearings, where there was, the seafloor was effectively devoid of these kelp fronds, which made these ecosystems much less biodiverse. Right? It effectively destroyed that ecosystem. And obviously, once all the giant kelp's gone, what's going to happen to the sea urchins? Well, the food, they overate this food, and now they're going to pay for it, right? Because without the giant kelp, the sea urchin population is going to crash as well. We put a moratorium on sea otter hunting, and as a result now, the sea otter populations have recovered, and the giant kelp forests have recovered as well. So this is called the trophic cascade. By removing the sea otter, we cause the rest of the ecosystem to collapse. And I talked about this early on, but why are biodiverse ecosystems more resistant to changes like this, to trophic cascades? Yep.
There's more predators eating different things. So like if one food source got wiped out, it's all other.
Exactly, right? The menu, all of the different feeding relationships, they're more interconnected, and there's just more options on the menu. I gave the example of like ants in the Amazon rainforest. If one species of ant goes extinct, likely not going to have a large impact on the Amazon rainforest because there's thousands of species of ant, right? But this is a great example of a trophic cascade.